Marcus's voice cracked. She deserves to have her story told. Thompson glanced at the hole he'd been digging, then back at Marcus. She escaped twice. First time, she made it almost a mile through the forest before the dogs caught her, left scratches on trees, tried to create a trail. We had to move the entire operation. After that, couldn't risk her markers being found. The sheriff's hand inched toward his weapon as he continued. Second time, she actually managed to hide evidence, photos, documents. She'd stolen a bloody piece of her shirt with a note, buried it all in a cache she marked. That's what digging up. Not her body, but her final you to us. If the feds expand their search grid, they'll find it eventually. Where is she, Thompson? Where's Elena's body? You want to know how she died? Thompson's desperation morphed into cruelty when she finally broke after weeks of interrogation. You know what information she gave us? Badge numbers from 5 years ago, outdated radio frequencies, patrol schedules that had changed 3 times since her capture. She played us, fed us worthless intel to buy time, hoping someone would find her. Marcus heard engines in the distance, still faint but growing closer. Thompson heard them, to his panic returning. We realized she'd never give us anything useful. The specialist wanted to sell her, said she'd bring good money in certain markets, federal agent as a trophy, but she'd seen to have phoned for many faces, knew too much, so I handled it myself. Thompson's voice dropped. 1 shot back of the head, same as her partner. She died brave, if that matters, never begged, never stopped fighting. Where is her body? Marcus demanded, his vision blurring with tears he couldn't afford to shed. Yet Thompson smiled coldly. Where do you think we had a crematorium for problems like her? No body, no evidence, no closure for families who ask too many questions. Your sister is dead. Rivera has been for 8 years. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Thompson's hand moved for his weapon, using Marcus' moment of grief as a distraction, but the forest around them suddenly came alive with movement. 2 men emerged from the trees. Marcus recognized them from the mill, armed with rifles, and moving to flank him, dropped the weapon fed. One commanded. Marcus tried to swing his Glock toward the new threat, but a rifle caught him in the temple. Stars exploded across his vision as he fell to his knees. His weapon was kicked away as hands roughly searched him, taking his phone, wallet, and backup magazine. Through blurred vision, Marcus saw Thompson standing over him, his service weapon drawn. You should have left this alone, Rivera. You could have lived with uncertainty. Now you'll die just like your sister did, fighting for nothing, saving no one, the darkness rushing up to meet. Marcus felt almost merciful compared to the weight of Thompson's revelations. Elena had suffered for 2 months, had fought and planned and tried to leave evidence, had died alone, cremated to ash, erased from the world, except in the memories of her killers as consciousness faded. Marcus heard Thompson organizing the men, preparing to move him somewhere else for disposal, but he also heard something else. Engines growing louder, closer than Thompson realized. Chun's team following his trail, racing against time, just as Marcus had. The last thing he registered before darkness claimed him was Thompson's curse of recognition, the sheriff finally understanding that Marcus hadn't come alone. After all, consciousness returned in waves, each one bringing fresh pain from the rifle strike to Marcus' temple. The world swayed and bounced, accompanied by the rumble of an engine and the smell of motor oil and fierce sweat. He was in the back of a van, hands zip-tied behind him, shoulder pressed against cold metal flooring that vibrated with every pothole. Through his clearing vision, Marcus could make out 2 other figures, the men who'd ambushed him in the clearing. They sat on wheel wells, rifles across their laps, discussing logistics in a mixture of English and Russian. Despite the throbbing in his skull, Marcus forced himself to focus, to observe, to remember. His detraining kicked in, even through the pain. Memorize everything, survive now, testify later. The van took a sharp left turn, and through the windshield, Marcus glimpsed a rusted water tower, its faded letters reading Cascade Lumber Company. Another turn revealed a bridge over a creek, the old wooden structure groaning under the van's weight. 20 minutes of careful observation gave him a mental map of landmarks: a burned-out gas station, a distinctive rock formation, a cell tower. On a distant ridge, breadcrumbs that might lead rescuers to him, assuming he lived long enough to share them. The warehouse complex materialized from the forest, like a cancer of corrugated metal and broken concrete. What had once been a thriving lumber processing facility now served a darker purpose. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed older ones in the dirt. Security cameras on new posts covered every approach. The windows were painted black from the inside, and Marcus noticed air conditioning units, unusual for an abandoned building, but necessary for storing certain drugs and keeping human cargo from suffocating. They dragged him from the van, his legs unsteady from the head injury. The main warehouse door opened to reveal a scene from Marcus' worst nightmares. The acrid stench hit first: human waste, unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and something chemical underneath it all. Industrial lighting illuminated a space divided by chain-link fencing into makeshift cells. Each cage held multiple victims, mostly young women and teenage girls, some barely older than children. They huddled together on thin mattresses, many showing bruises, torn clothing, the hollow-eyed look of those who'd learned that screaming brought only punishment. Madre Dios, one girl whispered, pressing against the fencing as they dragged Marcus past. Others shrank back, conditioned to fear any new arrival as a potential customer or tormentor along the far wall. Marcus counted at least 50 kilos of what looked like heroin in vacuum-sealed packages, plus boxes marked with pharmaceutical symbols that likely contained fentanyl. A sophisticated drug packaging station occupied one corner, complete with industrial presses and scales. This wasn't just human trafficking. It was a full-spec criminal enterprise, where human beings were just another commodity to be bought, sold, and discarded. Thompson was already there, engaged in heated discussion with a man Marcus recognized as Victor Klav. The Russian gestured angrily at Marcus's accented English, carrying across the warehouse. "This is insane, Thompson. A federal agent. You bring federal agent here." "We had no choice," Thompson shot back. "He was at the burial site. He knows about Elena Rivera, about the whole operation." "Then we kill him now. Dump body across border. Let Canadians deal with it." "Wait." A new voice interrupted. Cheney emerged from an office area, his expression calculating. "First we find out what he knows, who he told. If D-Team is coming, we need to know how much time we have." Marcus was shoved into a reinforced storage room, little more than a closet with a heavy door. His phone, weapon badge, and wallet were stripped away, tossed carelessly onto a desk. Outside they left his hands zip-tied, apparently confident that the door and guard would be sufficient through the door's small window. Marcus could see them arguing. Thompson wanted to execute him immediately and flee. Klav worried about their merchandise. Moving dozens of victims across the border would take hours. Chenwei seemed focused on extracting information, mentioning something about enhanced interrogation that made Marcus blood run cold. The guard they posted outside looked barely 20, nervous sweat beating his forehead as he clutched an AK-47 knockoff. Marcus watched him through the window, noting how he kept checking his phone, how his attention wandered to the activity in the main warehouse, where others were preparing vehicles and victims for transport. Time was critical. Chen's team would reach the burial site, find Thompson's abandoned car and signs of struggle, but without GPS coordinates, they'd have to search dozens of possible locations. The young guard stepped away, called to help load victims into a transport truck. This was Marcus's chance. The storage room had metal shelving units, and Marcus found what he needed: a bracket with a sharp edge where the paint had chipped away. He worked his zip ties against it, feeling plastic bite into his wrists, blood-making. His hands slippery, the pain was excruciating, but necessary after 5 minutes of sawing the ties. Finally parted, Marcus quickly scanned the room for weapons, but found only cleaning supplies and old paperwork through the window. He could see the guard's jacket hanging on a chair, his phone visible in the pocket. The main warehouse bustled with activity as traffickers prepared for evacuation. Their attention focused on logistics rather than their prisoner. Moving silently, Marcus eased the door open. The jacket was 3 feet away. He grabbed the phone, powered it on, and dialed Chen's number from memory. One ring to the guard was returning, talking to another trafficker. Chen, the familiar voice answered. Warehouse trafficking victims, GPS on this phone. Marcus whispered urgently, hearing footsteps approaching, multiple hostages, heavy weapons. The guard rounded the corner, his eyes widening in shock at seeing Marcus free with his phone. Training took over. Marcus grabbed a metal pipe from the shelving unit and swung hard, catching the young man across the temple. The guard crumpled his weapon, clattering on concrete. Marcus snatched the AK-47, checking the magazine. Full safety off. Amateur hour. He could hear shouting from the main warehouse. Someone calling for the guard. Through the doorway, he could see traffickers hurting victims toward transport vehicles, preparing to execute their evacuation plan. The math was brutal. 1 federal agent with a borrowed weapon against at least 6 armed traffickers with dozens of houses as routes that shifted based on law enforcement patterns. Thompson provided the 2 unidentified bodies in the cave were confirmed as Maria Gonzalez and her 9-year-old daughter, Anna, who died from intentional overdoses when they tried to escape during transport. We dumped the truck 6 months ago. Thompson explained. Original hiding spot was being developed at construction crews. Getting too close, figured the cave would hold it until we could destroy it properly. 5 additional burial sites were revealed, each containing victims who'd resisted or become liabilities. Families who'd waited years for news would finally have answers. Bodies to bury, some measure of closure as dawn broke over the forest. Elena's remains were carefully removed for proper burial. Marcus stood vigil throughout, speaking quietly to his sister, updating her on their parents, on the lives she'd saved, on how her sacrifice had meaning. The medics periodically checked his vitals, concerned about shock and blood loss, but understood this vigil was as necessary as any medical treatment. You ready? Chen asked gently as the coroner's van prepared to depart. Marcus took one last look at the clearing where his sister had been hidden for 8 years, where she'd used her final moments of control to hide evidence that would eventually destroy her killers. Where Thompson had thought darkness and earth could bury truth forever, she fought. Marcus said, Elena's note carefully folded in his pocket. Even at the end, even when she knew she would die, she fought to leave something behind to save others. He finally accepted the paramedics' ministrations, letting them guide him to an ambulance as they drove toward the hospital. Marcus watched the sun rise over the Washington forest, painting the trees in gold, and shadows somewhere behind them. Crime scene tape marked places of horror ahead. 32 survivors were beginning their journey back to lives interrupted. Elena was gone, had been gone for 8 years, but her determination to protect and serve had outlived. Her body had waited, buried in dirt and darkness, until her little brother could finish what she'd started. Thompson would die in prison. The trafficking network was shattered, lives were saved. It wasn't justice, nothing could be after what Elena endured. But it was resolution, it was truth finally dragged into light. It was the best Marcus could do with the time he'd been given that his sister had not.